Hello everybody, my name is Louis Lacal. This month, we will go into the deep dark crevices, down the tunnels of hell, search for the power of the cross, and drain the dark muddy lakes of hell for the best horror films for your viewing pleasure. We will review and discuss two great underrated films and the genre that they are a part of in this month's Man Bites Retro Halloween edition. This week, we are going to be presenting two great films in cinema that have been creatures from beyond. These are things that come out and haunt our dreams and haunt our everyday life. These are the urban myths, the urban legends, the things that go bump in the night and come out to stab you, to hook you, to do all the horrible things in your world. Now, the first one that I want to go into is Candyman.
Have you ever heard of Candyman? If you look in the mirror, you say his name 5 times.
In cities everywhere,
Candyman?
they whisper his name.
Right. Candyman.
It's just a story.
Candyman?
Candyman.
Just a ghost story.
Candyman.
An entire community starts attributing the daily horrors of their lives to a mythical figure.
The legend first appeared in 1890. He was attacked, mutilated, and burned to death. Poor Candyman.
Helen, a woman died in there. Leave it.
Everyone knows he isn't real.
That's modern oral folklore.
Everyone. Except Helen Lyle.
Bernadette.
It ain't safe around here. I don't scare too easy. Don't know about Ruthie Jean? They ain't never gonna catch him. Who? Candyman.
Who is that?
I came for you.
Do I know you?
Now, she is about to discover
Helen? Get out! Get out!
what's behind the mystery.
I'm sick.
What's behind the legend.
Listen, he's under the bed!
And most terrifying of all,
Come with me.
what's behind the mirror.
He's here.
Candyman. You don't have to believe. Just beware.
This one explores the urban legend of the Candyman. This man that has a hook for a hand and slices you from one side to the other if you say his name 5 times in the mirror. That's right. It's just like all those other urban legends. If you say the incantation of the name of the thing that is the horror, then that is what comes out and haunts you, follows you, and hunts you. This is pretty much what it is. And this story revolves around this one woman that she decides to write a thesis on urban legends in the university in Chicago. And she decides to go after the legend of Candyman because it's something that's been brought up various times by people that she's interviewing and trying to learn more about urban legends. This one keeps cropping up and coming back up, so she decides to explore it. So she grabs her best friend, the one that's working with her on the thesis, and they go to these projects basically. And the project is called Cabrini Green, this is a public housing development in Chicago, and it looks nice, but there is something hidden behind the walls. There is something hidden in the truths and the minds of all the people that live there, because they all think that this string of murders is all the Candyman's doing. And then these women want to put it to the trial, so they actually do the incantation in the building of the murderers. Nothing appears behind them, so they think they're safe. They think that they're okay, but they're not. This film quickly, very, very quickly, devolves into this crazy cat and mouse game between the Candyman and these two women. And there's slow decline into insanity, both of the women. And it's very interesting how this film doesn't capture all the cliches of horror movies. It doesn't follow all the normal tropes of horror movies. It actually breaks a lot of the molds and stuff like that. There's no chase. There's no, oh, this thing is going to pop up if you do this. No, it pops up whenever the hell it feels like after you say its name. And then it starts tackling you, not in your physical form, but in your mental. So very much like Nightmare on Elm Street and all these movies, this is very much a psychological battle and a psychological horror, which I really, really enjoy. And this film is based on The Forbidden by Clive Barker. Obviously, you know, Clive Barker is huge when it comes to horror, so it's definitely a normal tribute to him. Bernard Rose is the one that directed this, and screenplay by the director as well. It stars Virginia Madsen, Tony Todd, Alexander Berkeley, and Casey Lemons. Sorry. Now, Tony Todd is Candyman, and one of the attributes of the Candyman not only is the hook, but the body of bees. This man is made of bees, which it is super fascinating, because when you start learning about the backstory of the movie and everything like that, you actually find out that they actually used physical bees in his mouth in some of the scenes. So he had like his mouth swelled up because of the bee stings and stuff like that in his mouth. It's super fascinating, the story behind the making of this film. It's a 1992 film, and you can't tell. It's pretty fascinating how well this holds up. And then this film explores this very fascinating part, which is it goes into this black urban neighborhood that is very rarely portrayed in horror films, in particular, in an unusual light, like it is in this one. It's very fascinating how not only is the ghoul, the ghost, or the haunter African American, but his victims are African American, which that's usually very, very contrarian to what horror films do. Horror films, especially in the 60s, 70s, they portrayed this very racist approach, and they actually made the people, the murderers, the sociopaths, all that stuff of African American persuasion out of racism, and their victims were white. That's usually how it is. Not only that, but also the African American is usually the first victim of a murder film, and that cliche came around because of the 70s and 80s films that portrayed this all the time. Now, this film turns that completely on its head and doesn't follow these normal tropes. Not only does it develop the mythology of the Candyman in a very effective way, it actually builds the mythology in a way that is actually believable, and then it feels like something that actually can be tangible and could actually occur not only in Chicago but in any city across the United States. Because most urban legends are based on reality and all that, it's kind of fascinating to see what comes out of it. But this one in particular kind of grabs something that has not been seen, especially in 92 in horror films. And I think that's very important because this set the pace to make horror films not only that had other perspectives, but actually opened the door for African American horror, which is fucking great. Like some of these horror films that came out of urban legends, that came out of like Creepshow style films and stuff like that, are really, really good and creepy as hell. And even the most recent ones like Us, like there's a whole bunch that have come out recently, and it's really cool how that kind of opened the door. This film in particular opened the door for African American horror films, which unfortunately up to this point non-existent, or if they were one of these really bad B films. So I think Candyman is a personal great choice to watch for Halloween, and it is the personification of a creature that comes out, a creature that you call upon to bring forth, and ensues its horror based on that. And I honestly really enjoy those kind of films, the creatures from beyond, quote unquote. And we'll go over the next film that I want to go into, because this is another one from Creatures from Beyond. We'll be right back after these next messages.
Hello, movie nerds. This is Louis Lacow.
This is William Phoenix.
And I'm your host, Brandon Lacow. Do you search for hours on Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, and Shudder? Always looking for the next show to binge or movie to watch? Before you binge, take a bite with Man Bites Film.
Okay, so Creatures from Beyond. That might seem a little confusing because there's a lot of weird things that could classify as that. Now, the two films that I chose today, the first one being Candyman, is a creature, an urban legend, a monster that comes out and ensues its revenge on the person that calls its name and uses its incantation to bring it forward. The next one is even more interesting, means it explores the mind and mental illness, which is what really is personified when you see these creature features, these creatures that come from beyond, these creatures that are brought forward by words. These are all representations of mental illness, representations of depression, anxiety, social, anxieties, I guess you could say, but it's all stems back into a mental state of the person that is telling the story. And it's very cool to see these films because it tackles these tough subjects like mental illness in a way that kind of captures exactly what needs to be captured. It gives people hope in a way, and it identifies triggers that people may have. And not only does it identify the triggers, but it actually talks about the triggers, which is important because if it wasn't for films like this and like these horror films, we wouldn't have the mental illness awareness that we have nowadays, because psychologists have been fascinated with this kind of thing. Like very much like Silence of the Lambs, and very much like the 60s and 70s that actually brought forward the psychology behind serial killers. It's very important because in the end, that is a mental illness. As much as we don't want to see it like that, because that kind of gives them sympathy for what they do. But at the same time, we have to understand that those are all chemical imbalances. Those are all moments in our brain chemistry that are messed up, and that could stem from violence in our past, that could stem from chemical imbalance, that could stem from just overall stress that is ensued in us, or just horrendous things that have occurred to us. And a lot of these, they come from mythology, and the mythology is based on killings, based on things that really spark the imagination of everybody in the community, very much like Candyman, that it is a way for us to understand what actually happened and give it something other than a human's touch to it, I guess you could say. Because we don't want to think that humanity is that dark and that evil. We all have this very pessimistic approach to life, whether you want to admit it or not, even optimistic approach to life, even though a lot of us could be very pessimistic sometimes. Optimism is our go-to. And the only way that we can ration out somebody killing a child, somebody killing a person randomly for no reason, is by creating urban legends like Candyman. And this next film is no different. I am going to be talking about In the Mouth of Madness.
This one will drive you absolutely mad.
The riots began because the stores could not meet the demands of Sutter Kane's novel, In the Mouth of Madness.
Kane disappeared 2 months ago without a trace.
You're the guy that writes horror books.
You can forget about Stephen King. Kane outsells them all.
I need to know if he's alive or dead, and I need that book.
It's a setup. I just have to work out how it's set up.
Kane's writing has been known to have an effect on his readers.
See this? It's a map.
This whole thing has been staged.
You just get out.
This is not reality.
It's all happening for real, Trent.
I know this book will drive people crazy.
Let's hope so. The movie comes out next month.
This is such a great film. The reason I sparked doing this series on retro is because In the Mouth of Madness, it's such a fascinating approach to a horror film, because not only does it actually explore mental illness, but it explores it in a way that terrifies you and gives you a little bit of insight into a writer's mind. Now, we have seen films that writers have come out and have become killers and all that stuff, very much like Ninth Gate, like The Shining, like all these other films that the slow descent into madness kind of takes over their being, and by doing so, their humanity is lost. And whether it be like in real life, the moments where actors portray certain characters like Heath Ledger, that the character is so dark and so it's very hard to get into that mindset without losing your mind. So I think that's very fascinating how actors even fall prey to this same thing that happens in The Mouth of Madness, which is a John Carpenter film, because John Carpenter is amazing in a lot of his films, and this is no different. This actually approaches an insurance investigator that is he's one of these insurance investigators that actually says, oh, you're making a false claim. That is not correct, and you shouldn't be claiming insurance on it. So he's that asshole, that guy, that kind of says, nope, you're not getting insurance money for that at all, because I think you're totally full of shit. And he is investigating this writer that the published company is actually requesting his services because they want to file a claim for the loss of their writer, and it's one of their most prestigious writers. Now, his writing style is very dark. his writing style goes into the deep, dark crevices of our mind, but it also does more. It calls in spirits, demons, and creatures from other worlds and tries to bring them forward. He is trying to bring this alternate reality into our world with the power of his words. And that is super fascinating, because we've been talking about a cult in word form since the beginning of time, but most recently in records of certain heavy metal bands and stuff like that. If you play it backwards, you get you could call an incantation to call the devil and all that stuff, and if you say certain words backwards, it actually calls the devil. And there's a lot of legends behind that, which is really cool. And we also have Ouija boards, which is basically, it's like a telegraph to the alternate world, and that brings forward all these things. We're going to go into that in another episode, but this one is about this man that goes and explores and tries to investigate this writer that disappeared. Now, the writer that disappeared is not a normal guy. Sutter Kane is a writer that can call forward the demons of hell, and his books are very dark and very deep, and they go way further than most books go, and they explore kind of the deep dark crevices of our mind. But John Carpenter goes even further and actually brings out a whole subgenre of horror. This man is an admirer of Lovecraft, and you could tell drastically in this film that all the monsters that come out of the deep, they're all Lovecraftian style. And this particular story revolves around this writer that he writes one of his final books, and this book is called In the Mouth of Madness, and it is an incantation, because not only is it's not an urban legend, it's not one killer, it's not one thing that comes out. This brings out the anger, the rage, the horror that all of us have on our minds on an everyday basis, and brings that out to the light, brings that out for all humanity to see. And it makes all of us completely drop our instincts and make us all go into the deep dark crevices of our mind to show our true nature, our true horror. And this particular actor, Sam Neill, needs to actually explore and try to find the writer, and by doing so, he actually tries to find this fictitious town that the writer writes about. And it's super interesting because it feels like a Stephen King novel, and it even takes place up north, so it kind of captures a lot of the Stephen King aspects of it, just a lot darker and a lot deeper, I think, than a Stephen King novel can go. And that's the cool part, though, is that it explores that side of it. But this film opens up in a very odd way. It opens up in a psych hospital, and you're kind of trying to figure out why this person is in a psych hospital, why he's being put there. And the film slowly develops into that. I don't want to go any further into what he finds in the town that he discovers that the writer bases all his stories on, because that is a deep, deep story, and it's better left for you to enjoy as you actually watch the film. Now, this film is, I believe it came out in 94, sorry. But it filmed in 92, very much like the Candyman. So it has that deep, dark story to it. It has that darkness of humanity that we all felt in the 80s and 70s, late 70s. And it brings that to light. It brings that, all our social anxieties that we had in the 80s and 90s. And it brings that out. And I think it's it does a great job. John Carpenter is fucking amazing at doing pacing and telling a story in a way that's very unusual. He does things that give you a sense of dread and make you feel uncomfortable. So this film does that with the music, it does it with the cinematography, it does it with the story and the acting. They all play this beautiful, magical story that comes together and gives you these incredible moments of horror that, for me personally, the first time I saw this, I had dreams about this movie for almost a month. That's how impactful it was. And it makes you feel uncomfortable. Now, I rewatched it again, and it still gives you that sense of dread, even though you know what's going to happen. And you love it. Especially if you're a fan of horror, this is a must-watch. This is a must-watch for any horror fan out there, especially if you're a John Carpenter fan. For me, this is personally a 9 out of 10. I love this movie. And I definitely think that it deserves a lot more attention than it's getting currently. So please, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode of Man Bites Retro. And stay tuned for our next episode that will explore even further into the minds of madness in the genre of horror. We'll see you guys soon. Please remember to subscribe on our channel on all podcast sites and join us on Facebook for a conversation that goes even further. You can check out Man Bites Film on any podcast site and Cellar Door, A Journey into Middle-earth if you're a Tolkien fan or Lord of the Rings fan.